Orlando Woolridge had 31 points, Quentin Daly had 30, and Jordan had 27.
Jordan's stat line, 27, 9, 4 and 5 was just extraordinary. And Woolridge, Daly and Jordan combining for 88 points.
I always like to say that Michael got to play with me for a year at North Carolina. I think it really helped him.
Spectacular player from the beginning.
You can see right away Jordan was going to be a big-time scorer.
And showed what an impact he was going to have on the league.
This is NB85, celebrating the 30-year anniversary of Michael Jordan's rookie season in the NBA. And now, your hosts, Adam Ryan and Aaron Steen.
Welcome back to the show, Aaron. This is episode 10 of our NB85 series. How are you, mate?
Well, on the second of our first ever back-to-back recordings, Adam, I'm a little fatigued.
I know exactly how you are because we just ended recording episode 9 about 35 seconds ago. So we have to spoil the illusion there, mate. In this episode, we'll be covering the next 15-day block of the NBA's 39th season, and it's an episode that I'm sure is going to be an absolute gem. I really enjoyed the research that we did for this episode, and we've got plenty of great facts and minutiae about the NBA, mate.
And due to a miscommunication, I'll also be enjoying the work that you've put into the notes for this episode.
It's a joint effort, mate. We've done well. This is going to be a great episode, I'm sure.
We don't get onto the homepage of the iTunes store by accident, Adam.
Oh, that's right. I actually hadn't even made mention of that yet. Yeah. As we record this, mate, it's November the 24th here in Australia. And just this week gone, the podcast was featured on the front page of the iTunes store in Australia. That's pretty phenomenal. Definitely worth making mention of. So thank you for reminding me there. And thank you to all the listeners of the show who have helped make that happen, to be honest. If you're a regular listener, welcome back. If you're new to the show, thank you for joining us.
NBA News Notes and Quotes, November 10th through 24, 1984.
Let's get straight into it, mate. On November the 10th, the Chicago Bulls were 118-116 victors over the Indiana Pacers at Market Square Arena in Indianapolis, in front of a crowd of 16,920 people. The Bulls moved to 6-2 on the season, so a fantastic start for Chicago. In a November 11 article from the Chicago Tribune titled, "Jordan has just what Bulls need," it breaks down the end of this game. MJ made 2 crucial blocks before hitting the game-winning basket, the first of his NBA career, with 4 seconds left. To that point, the crowd at Market Square Arena was the 5th largest in Pacers history. And for what it's worth, Caldwell Jones and Steve Stepanovich were ejected from the game with 4 minutes and 20 seconds left in the fourth quarter. This was Jordan's first game-winning basket in only the first couple of weeks of his NBA career, one of many more that would follow. Some stats for the game, mate. Orlando Woolridge had 31 points, Quentin Daly had 30 and Jordan had 27. They combined for 88 points, which is a phenomenal effort in itself. And also on top of that, Jordan had 9 boards, 4 assists and 5 blocks, 2 of which came in that final minute. So what an incredible stat line that is. Dave Corzine as well had a double-double, 11 points and 13 rebounds. So he'd really come into his own in the last few games, as we spoke of in episode 9 of the show, was really starting to assert himself in the Chicago lineup, which is great to see. For the Indiana Pacers, Clark Kellogg had 31 points, Herb Williams had 23, Steve Stepanovich had 17 points and 12 boards. And
1 ejection.
And 1 ejection, yes, that's true. And Clark Kellogg, this was actually his season debut for the Pacers. He underwent arthroscopic knee surgery on October the 2nd. So he came back, 31 points, but unfortunately couldn't quite get the Pacers over the hill with the Bulls' 2-point victors.
3 points that I have from this game. Jordan stat line, 27, 9, 4 and 5 was just extraordinary. Woolridge, Daly and Jordan combining for 88 points. And as you watch Jordan's game winner, it could have actually been a 3-point play opportunity because one of the Indiana Pacer defenders actually undercuts him a little and bumps him on the shot when he's in midair.
And he had a really nice, very fortunate roll too. It sort of went around the rim a little bit, banked off the glass softly into the hoop. A fantastic game all around from MJ. But for those 3 main players for the Bulls offensively to combine for almost 90 points, yeah, quite spectacular.
There was an article attached to this game entitled NBA Enters a New Era, the Michael Jordan Show. Despite his excellent 31-point effort, Clark Kellogg described MJ's final minute as such. I was trying to get to the bucket. I felt like I had beat the one guy that was guarding me. Out of nowhere, Michael Jordan got a hand on the first shot. I got it back, then he blocked the second shot, and I didn't know what to do. After this game, the Bulls returned home for a 4-game stand, followed by a 7-game road trip. In other NBA news, Purvis Short of the Golden State Warriors had an impressive 48 points in a 109-97 loss at the Trailblazers. Short had 8 40-plus point games in this season, 3 of which remarkably happened in the time frame that we're discussing today.
I was really amazed when I read this. I knew Purvis Short had been a scorer during his career, but I think he played 9 seasons with the Warriors, and in the 84-85 season that we're chatting about, he was 4th in the league in scoring, just behind Jordan. Jordan was 28.2 points a game. Purvis Short was 28-point-zip. A phenomenal effort, and then that led me on a wormhole through YouTube and some more Google searches, finding out about Purvis Short. And he had such a beautiful-looking jump shot, just a rainbow high-arcing shots. We mentioned Isaiah Thomas was the king of the high-arcing shot. I reckon Purvis Short's jumped right up there as well. Have you had a chance to see many of his highlights, mate?
No, I've heard that Purvis Short's high arcer was quite tall.
So in short, you haven't seen it?
That was a bit of a tall order, mate.
It was. Obviously, Purvis was never nervous when it came to launching a jump shot.
On November 12, in the Chicago Tribune, there was an article entitled "Not All the Bulls Are Sky High," which detailed the mixed emotions of David Greenwood and Ronnie Lester, the former still holding out on contract negotiations, whilst the latter, Ronnie Lester, sprained his ankle in the team's final preseason game and hadn't played a single minute of the regular season up to that point. Now,
mate, on November the 13th, one of 2 games that we'll be detailing in episode 11 of this series, the Chicago Bulls were 120-117 victors over the San Antonio Spurs at Chicago Stadium in front of 9,866 fans. The Bulls moved to a very impressive 7-2 on the season. This is one of Jordan's greatest games from his whole career, and it happens in just his 9th professional contest. He finished the game with 45 points. He had 16 of those points in the 4th quarter. He had 10 rebounds and 4 assists as well. Orlando Woolridge capably assisted with 20 points of his own. For the San Antonio Spurs, George Gervin had 28 points, Mike Mitchell 23, and Artis Gilmore had 19. There was a great play to end this first quarter, and we'll be chatting obviously about this game in much more depth in episode 11, but Dave Corzine threw a great 3-quarter length pass to MJ, who connected on a deep 3 to beat the first quarter buzzer. Jordan's 45 points were the most by a Chicago Bull since Reggie Theus went for 46 at the Boston Garden in December of 1982. On November the 14th, an article entitled "Stadium Rocks, Jordan Rolls," there's a great quote from Dave Corzine, and it is, "He can do it all. When he can get those people," and he's referring to the Boo Vultures, "when he can get those people to cheer for me, he's a magician. Yeah, Michael Jordan, he's my man." So I found that to be a fantastic quote, and it needed to go into this episode.
It's good to see that Dave had a sense of humour about the situation as well, because he was under the pump.
Oh, for sure, mate.
In the Chicago Tribune on November the 14th, in an article entitled "Bird and Erving are fined at $7,500, Scotty Sterling, who was the NBA's VP of Operations, levied total fines of $30,500 to 17 players and 76ers coach Billy Cunningham for the November 9 fracas. The fines to Julius and Larry were the second largest handed out to individual players in NBA history at the time. The largest fine to that date was a $10,000 fine to Kermit Washington for the sickening punch on Rudy Tomjanovich back in 1977. The word sickening being very appropriate.
That was frightening.
Also on November 14, the NBA's only unbeaten team to that point, the Houston Rockets, who were 8-0, lost to the 1-7 Indiana Pacers. Indiana were led by Terrence Stansbury, world famous for the Statue of Liberty dunk.
Yes. Sorry, just derailed you there by saying yes. He was selected by the Dallas Mavericks in the 84 draft at pick number 15, but was traded away to Indiana before the season commenced.
And finished this game with 25 points on 9 of 14 from the field. The very next day, on the 15th of November, the Boston Celtics went into Chicago Stadium and had a 125-105 win over the Bulls in front of an impressive stadium crowd of the time of 17,753, which put the Bulls at 7-3 on the season. The Celtics, of course, came into Chicago Stadium as the defending NBA champions, having won the 1984 world title. Chicago were led by Michael Jordan, who scored 27 points along with 2 rebounds and 2 assists. Orlando Woolridge had 19 points, and Wes Matthews finished with 14 points and 6 assists. For the defending champs, Cedric Maxwell had an impressive game with 30 points. Kevin McHale finished with 25. Dennis Johnson, 21 points, 7 assists. Robert Parrish, 15 points and 17 rebounds. And Larry Bird had 14 points and 17 rebounds. So you can see the firepower that the Celtics had at the time. The Celtics were really fired up for this game following comments, particularly from Orlando Woolridge in Chicago papers, which you'll elaborate on for us now, Adam.
Yeah, I'll include them in the show notes of the episode, which can be found at inallairness.com/NB85-10. There was a couple of different papers where Orlando Woolridge was quoted as perhaps saying that the Bulls were going to win the game against the Celtics and that he could probably put a job on Larry Bird in terms of trying to shut him down a bit. So a number of the Celtics were quite fired up, and I believe Quinn Buckner actually read out loud one of the articles to the Celtics on the team flight to Chicago. That added the motivation for the Celtics to really come out and dominate the young Michael Jordan-led Bulls.
Orlando saying he could do a number on Larry Bird. I might have to rethink that jersey. In this game, Jordan had 4 fouls before halftime, which may have stymied his effectiveness in the second half. The holdout, David Greenwood, had finally reached a deal to resume his career with Chicago, but wasn't available to play in this game. His rebounding ability was sorely missed, with the Celtics smashing the Bulls on the boards 56-42.
Also on November the 15th, the Cavaliers, who were the NBA's only winless team at 0-9, had defeated the Atlanta Hawks 102-99. Again, Purvis Short makes an appearance here on the 15th of November. He scored 30 of his 40 points in the second half in Golden State's win over the Dallas Mavericks 117-112. On November the 17th, an article which is titled "Bulls Turn Lester Loose" begins, "The doctor is in town, but Ronnie Lester won't be around for the house call," which I really enjoyed. I love the wordplay, so I'm always going to include things like that. Ronnie Lester was waived by the Bulls, so unfortunately he was no longer in Chi-Town and was looking for another job elsewhere. I think it was about a week and a half later he'd actually end up being signed by the LA Lakers. Also on November the 17th, we'll quickly chat about the second game that we'll detail in episode 11 of this series. The Philadelphia 76ers were 109-100 winners over the Chicago Bulls at Chicago Stadium. It was a crowd of 18,116, so you can see that the big-name marquee teams of the league, when coming into Chicago, really got the crowd to get to standing room only proportions. Sadly, it didn't happen as much as you'd expect during this season, given Jordan's prowess as it went on. The Bulls dropped to 7-4 on the season. Now, this was David Greenwood's first game of the season for the Bulls. He was actually supposed to help bolster the Bulls' front line and their rebounding. However, the Bulls only tallied 28 rebounds for the game, an all-time team low at that stage. Now, in contrast, Moses Malone for the Sixers had 19 boards of his own, so pretty stark contrast. For Chicago, Orlando Woolridge had an absolute blinder, 33 points. Quentin Daly had 24. Jordan had 16 points. He struggled mightily with 4 of 17 from the field, but did provide good help with 5 boards, 7 assists, and a couple of blocks. For Philly, Moses Malone was an absolute machine. He had 39 points. Already mentioned he had 19 boards, 2 blocks. Dr. J had 26 points, 8 rebounds, 4 assists, and 2 blocks. Mo Cheeks had 12 points. Sadale Threet, former podcast guest, had to get that in there. And Bobby Jones had 10 points apiece. And Sir Charles Barkley had 2 points, 2 rebounds, and 1 block in just 14 minutes of playing time. Julius Erving and Michael Jordan actually met for the first time just before the game had started.
On November 19, the Indiana Pacers beat the Bulls 137-120 at Chicago Stadium. To paint a picture for how much the Bulls were struggling to draw a home crowd, after the 18,116 that attended the game against the Philadelphia 76ers. The very next game against the not-so-attractive Indiana Pacers drew a grand total of 7,516. For the Bulls, Michael Jordan finished with 34 points, 5 rebounds and 2 assists. Orlando Woolridge, another great offensive performance with 27 points. Caldwell Jones, 16 points and 9 rebounds, and Anis Mo Watley, 8 points and 10 assists. For the Indiana Pacers, they had 7 players in double figures, led by Vern Fleming's 26 points, 24 of which were in the second half of this game. Podcast favourite, Jerry Seasting, finished with 22 points, and Clark Kellogg had 15 points and 12 rebounds. This game on November 19, 1984 was the third straight home loss for the Chicago Bulls. On November 20, former Chicago Bulls great and one of only 4 players to have their number retired by the Bulls, Jerry Sloan, was named assistant coach of the Utah Jazz. He resigned from his head coach position with the CBA's Evansville Thunder. He also scouted for the Jazz during the 1983-84 NBA season.
I discovered that little nugget during the research for this episode, and I found it to be very pertinent to make mention of now, not only because of just the fact he'd gone to be a fantastic coach and one of the all-time greats in Utah, but his links to Chicago and just the impact he actually had on the NBA. We definitely should make mention as well, mate. On November the 21st, very sad, Chicago area high school phenom Ben Wilson was senselessly murdered. There's a fantastic, albeit heartbreaking, ESPN 30 for 30 feature titled Benji, which goes into the whole life of Ben Wilson, tragically cut short. It's really hard to even describe adequately the impact that he must have had on his family, friends, and the nation, even though he was just a high schooler at that stage, mate.
Yeah, really one of the great ESPN 30 for 30 episodes. It's very interesting to see the impact that Ben Wilson had on a number of Chicago products that eventually made it to the NBA, such as Nick Anderson and Derrick Rose.
It's hard to go from that to another standard story, but on November 21, in an article which is titled "Lockery Has Bulls on a Crash Course," it details Chicago's rebounding woes, and there's actually speculation that Wayne Tree Rollins may have been headed to Chicago if a possible deal was on offer, due to the fact that he was, and I quote, expendable by the success of 7-foot rookie Kevin Willis. Kevin Willis had a very successful NBA career, and I think he actually played legitimately up to the age of 43.
Made a brief appearance with the other Dallas Mavericks. I can't remember what season it was. It may have been in the 2006 to 2007 season. That's just a guess.
Yeah, I'm thinking 2007-ish. Now, on November 21, the Bulls took on the Milwaukee Bucks. Milwaukee handed the Bulls their 4th straight loss in a 108-98 victory at the Mecca in Milwaukee, in front of a crowd of 11,052. This was the first game of a 7-game Bulls road trip. Their next 6 would be against West Coast opponents. The Bulls had a staggering 25 turnovers. In comparison, the Bucks lost the ball only 12 times. For Chicago, Jordan had another outstanding game, but it wasn't enough. He had 35 points, 13 boards, 2 assists. Orlando Woolridge had 24 points. Steve Johnson had 6 points and 14 rebounds. For the Bucks, the great Paul Pressey, one of my favourite players back in the 1980s, who I've seen too little footage of, had 27 points and 7 assists. Terry Cummings, former podcast guest, here we go again, 22 points and 15 boards. And Sidney the Squid Moncrief, another great of the 1980s, 16 points.
On November 21, the human highlight film Dominique Wilkins of Atlanta had 31 points and 9 rebounds in a 122-90 victory versus the Utah Jazz. What was more interesting, though, was this was the first pro game played in New Orleans since the Jazz moved to Utah 5 seasons prior.
How cool of a stat was that? Now, that's something that I had to include for us to chat about. The fact that the game itself was an afterthought given the scoreline, but Dominique had a great game. Historical significance as well should not be overlooked.
And I'm hoping that I'm still alive at the point where New Orleans finally get the nickname Jazz back, because that's the only true place for it, surely.
Couldn't agree more, mate.
On November 23rd, Bernard King of the Knicks had 45 points in a 120-97 victory at Detroit. King, no stranger to high-scoring games against the Pistons, averaged 42.6 points per game in the Knicks' first-round series win in the 1984 playoffs.
That is ridiculous. That he was an absolute machine in that series, and that features prominently, I believe, in NBA Awesome Endings, the NBA Entertainment VHS release back in the late 1980s, early 1990s.
The two-handed putback dunk.
Oh, awesome. His fingers are all taped up. They got dislocations left, right, and centre.
Yeah, awesome. For any of our Australian listeners who will get this reference, his hands look like that of a wicketkeeper in cricket. Wicketkeepers have their fingers dislocated and broken, and they've got tape strewn right across all their fingers. Bernard's hands were more white than anything else.
Oh, what a fantastic series that was.
Averaging over 40 points per game in a playoff series. Imagine if someone had have ever done that in the final. Oh, hang on a minute, Michael.
1993 NBA Finals. Thank you very much, Mr. Jordan.
November 23rd, the Chicago Bulls travelled to the King County Domed Stadium, a.k.a. the King Dome, in Seattle, Washington, to play the Supersonics in front of 12,283 fans. The Bulls won 113-94 to send their season record to 8-6. Michael Jordan finished with 23 points, 4 rebounds and 3 assists. Orlando Woolridge, 20 points. David Greenwood, 12 points and 9 rebounds. And Mo Watley with 10 points and 15 assists. Are you enjoying my usage of the words Mo Watley?
I am, mate. I love it. But I actually tried to Google why he was called Mo. Do you actually know why? Was it literally to do with the fact... It couldn't have been to do with the fact he had a moustache or anything, could it?
I reckon just in the last few weeks I've actually seen it somewhere why he was called Mo, but I can't remember what the hell it was.
I'd love a listener to actually inform us of the true reason behind it. If you are aware of it and you're listening to this episode, please reach out and contact us and let us know, because I did try and Google it during the week. No word of a lie.
Just need a little Mo information on the topic.
What'll he think of next? All right, keep going.
For the Supersonics, Al Wood had 21 points, and I bring up Al Wood's name other than the fact he had 21 points. He was actually a part of the trade by the Sonics in July of 1986 to the Dallas Mavericks that brought Dale Ellis to the Rain Country.
One of the great players, Dale Ellis. He's a little bit underrated, I reckon, by today's standards, but really loved his game.
Ricky Sobers had 18 points, and Jack Sikma had 15 points and 7 rebounds. On the game, 6 balls, scored in double figures. Steve Johnson and Quinton Daly were the other 2. And a random stat, at this point in time of the season, Seattle were winless on the road.
Love random stats, mate. On November the 24th, Bernard King, in his very next game, had a then career high of 52 points in a 119-100 victory at home against the Pacers. This capped his third consecutive 40-plus performance. Incredibly, it was, in air quotes, only his third highest scoring performance of the 84-85 season. We'll cover his other 2 outbursts in future episodes of NB85. After a horrendous 2-9 start, and we talked about this in episode 9 of the series, the Knicks reeled off 6 straight wins, and this victory over Indiana was the 5th of that streak. Also on the 24th of November, the Portland Trailblazers were 141-131 winners over the Chicago Bulls at Memorial Coliseum, one of my favourite arenas at that stage, in Portland, Oregon, in front of 12,666 fans. The Bulls dropped to 8-7 on the season. It was also important to note this is the first pro meeting between MJ and Sam Bowie, and sadly, in a sign of future injury troubles, Sam had already missed some games earlier in the season due to a sprained ankle, and he also suffered a cracked rib in pre-season play. Things did not bode well for Sam and his future in professional ranks. A 42-point fourth quarter by the Bulls still wasn't enough. They went down by 10 in the end. For Chicago, Jordan had 30 points, 6 boards and 8 assists. Quinton Daly had 26 points. Dave Corzine had a monster game, 22 points on 9 of 14 from the field and 10 boards. For Portland, Jim Paxson, John's brother, had 31 points, and their father, Jim, played in the late 1950s. Kiki Vandeweghe had 30 points, Clyde Drexler 19, Sam Bowie had 11 points, 6 boards and 2 assists, pretty respectable numbers in just 27 minutes, but of course was overshadowed by the explosive Michael Jordan.
And this will be another one of those games that we have on DVD and will be breaking down to within an inch of its life in a future NB85 podcast.
I love it.
Some player of the weeks for this time frame that we're talking about today. On the week of November 11, Alex English of the Denver Nuggets, who had a pretty decent week, 37.5 points per game on 61.5% field goal shooting.
Yeah, he did all right.
The Nuggets had a 3-1 record on the week and had back-to-back 40-point games, 45 versus the Trailblazers and then 44 against the Utah Jazz. Alex English was a gentleman I was lucky enough to meet here in Melbourne a few years ago. On the week of November 18, Moses Malone was the NBA Player of the Week. Subpar stats for Moses, 36.3 points and 17 rebounds. Smoked the Pistons for 51 points on November 14, which was a Spectrum record. The previous was 50 points, held by, funnily enough, 76ers head coach Billy Cunningham in a 1970 playoff game.
Great stats all around, and I can't overlook the fact that you mentioned that you met Alex English very briefly. Was he quiet and unassuming as he appeared to be during his NBA career in the 80s?
Very much so. It was at a Basketball Australia-related breakfast here in Melbourne on a day that I also got to meet Horace Grant, Luke Longley and Ron Harper. Yeah, as you mentioned before, quiet and unassuming is a very, very apt way to describe Alex English. He came across as a real gentleman.
That's how I envisioned him to be based on what I'd seen and limited interviews that I saw of him during the 80s. So I'm pleased to hear that, mate. Now, let's finish off the episode, mate, by discussing a few of the individual highs from this period of time that we're chatting about. Now, this is incredible. We mentioned Purvis Short earlier. The high man in terms of individual scoring for this span of time is Purvis Short of the Golden State Warriors. He went for 59 points against the New Jersey Nets on the 17th of November. He was 20 of 28 from the field, including 4 3-pointers, and he was 15 of 16 from the free throw line. Unfortunately, the Warriors still lost by 17 points. They were outscored by 20, I believe, in the fourth quarter. But what an incredible performance, and I could not find any highlights on YouTube, sadly, of this game at least.
I had heard of Purvis Short, but the man dropped 59 in an NBA game.
I mean, that is, I used phenomenal a bit too much, but that is phenomenal.
It's extraordinary.
After seeing that he put up such massive numbers, I went to YouTube, and I'll include it in the show notes of this episode. There's a 20-minute plus clip of just Purvis Short jump shots and layups, which is really great, featuring footage from the mid-'80s, which I'd never seen before, so it's definitely worth checking out as well. Speaking of Purvis Short, he had a 12-year career in the NBA. I did allude to it earlier. He was fourth in points per game at 28 per contest in this 84-85 NBA season, so definitely could score and in a bunch. We also should note, mate, that Moses Malone of the Philadelphia 76ers, he sprung for 51 points versus the Pistons on the 14th of November, so a fantastic effort there from Moses. Now, speaking of Moses, our rebounding leader in this period of time, we had 3 equal leading rebounders with 19 boards as a single game high. Moses Malone against the Bulls on the 17th of November, Mark Eaton of the Utah Jazz against the Kansas City Kings on the 20th of November, and Charles Barkley of the Philadelphia 76ers at Phoenix on the 23rd of November. The high man in terms of assists was Johnny Moore of the San Antonio Spurs, who went for 17 against the Cleveland Cavaliers on the 10th of November. And to finish the episode, the NBA standings through November the 24th, the division leaders in the Atlantic, the Boston Celtics, were an all-conquering 11-1. In the Central Division, the Bucks were 10-5. In the Midwest, Denver was off to an 11-2 start. In the Pacific, the LA Lakers were 10-5, and the Chicago Bulls were 8-7, and they went 3-5 in the period of time that we're chatting about today. The Cleveland Cavaliers, unfortunately, were a very lowly 1-12. Thanks again, Aaron, for being part of the show. I'm pretty sure we know how it's going to end. Are you wishing to add anything further before we do finish this episode, mate?
Foe. Giddy up.
Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the show and share my web address with your friends and colleagues, inallairness.com. Check out the podcast archive for plenty more episodes with high-profile guests. Follow me on Twitter at inallairness. Please add your like to the show's social hub, facebook.com/inallairness. Join me next time for another edition of the show.